This is a 225 Slant 6 engine that I've rebuilt. It originally came out of a 1968 Dodge Dart. I rebuilt this engine to put into a 1969 Fargo. Now the Dart was automatic, the Fargo is a standard, and I would like to keep the standard. I currently have a problem or a situation with this engine in that it doesn't look like it's going to be a direct replacement for the vehicle that I'm putting it in. And the reason for that is the date code on the engine. As I've said, this came out of a 1968 Dodge Dart. I know this because the guy that I did the deal with, I seen the car, I seen the engine, and he removed it. I mean, that's not disputed. But when we get to the engine here and we're taking a look at some of the information, this is what we really have. This is number one spark plug. If you take a look at this boss here, you're gonna find a stamping there, and that'll give you some information. On the other side of the engine here, just below the intake and exhaust manifold, this is the casting in the block. So that number there we're going to use, and we're gonna find out that this engine is a 1965 and not a 1968 as we originally thought. The reason that becomes important is we found out the hard way. 1964 to 1967 has a different register hole. This is your register hole here for your flywheel. It needs to be the right size. So the register hole on this one is supposed to be 1.960. And anything after 1967, the register hole ends up being larger. We need to find the proper flywheel to fit this crankshaft. I took the flex plate that was off of the engine and I used that so that we could get the proper bolt pattern for the end of the crankshaft. Now this here, this little hole here, I do believe that this is going to show us that the distance between here and here is greater than all of these other ones that are equal. So I got the tape on here to show that's where it's lining up. If we go to try and turn it, now when we turn this thing, we're not going to get our holes, all of our holes to line up. That only goes on one way and one way only. I needed to find the correct flywheel for my application with the correct register hole for the crankshaft, which is 1.960, and the correct bolt pattern here. That was the number one thing to do. There's only one flywheel, to my knowledge, that's going to make this work. What I had done was I tried to find flywheels off of other makes, models, engines. This one happens to be off of a small block Dodge. The bolt pattern is wrong, and also that register hole is wrong. That register hole is 2.150. Now that we got the correct flywheel, now we have to get the clutch assembly to go with it. I ended ordering this clutch kit here that would bolt onto my flywheel. Now here's the problem. Our clutch fits fine, that's correct. And a friend of mine had told me that even if I wanted to, what I could do is I could reface this surface here. You could see where the original size of the clutch is. But he says if I resurface this, I could fit a larger clutch on there. So currently we're dealing with a 10-inch clutch, so the largest one I think that I could put on there if I wanted to would be a 10.5. If we take a look here from our bolt pattern, it is too close to the 11. So it would have to be a 10.5 if you were going to do that. Again, we have the right clutch right here. Now, when it came to the pressure plate assembly, distance between these two holes here, they aren't long enough. That will not bolt on to our flywheel here. These are where the bolts are to bolt that on. It's too small. Give you guys a rough measurement here. We've got about 11.5. And then when we take a look on this one here, we're closer to 10 5/8. So that's the clutch that goes with the pressure plate, but it does not fit. And this is the original pressure plate that went with the flywheel. Now, in all truth, this flywheel came with this, and I do not know what was going on here, but that does not look like it's the correct clutch. The reason I say that is the splines on here looks more like it's for a Ford, where the splines on this one here, this is like for the Dodge. And having mentioned that, that's another thing you need to do when you're ordering one of these things. You need to know that you've got a 23 spline count and a 1-inch shaft on here so that you get the correct one for a Dodge, or in my application. This is the clutch and the pressure plate that I received with my flywheel. And this is the one here that I'm going to be using. It looks like it to be in a little better shape, cleaned up, and it will fit on here. Now when we place that on top here, you can see that all of our holes are lining up. And you can see that we've got the clutch inside there. What we're still missing is the ring gear. This ring gear needs to be replaced, and also too, we need to find a ring gear that's going to match our starter. After we've gotten the correct flywheel for the crankshaft here, now we need to determine what our transmission is going to be, and then that decision is going to be part of the bell housing selection. Here's an engine sitting around in the shop here, and this is out of probably a 1980 Dodge truck. So this is the bell housing and the transmission off of that, and you can see that we've got our linkage on the side here. I don't know what this transmission is. I assume it could be an 833 or 838, but in all honesty, I don't know exactly what this transmission is. Now in my case, I want to use an NP435. This is a top loader transmission, where that other one that we were looking at, that was a side loader. What we have here is two versions of the NP435. This one over here is a Ford, and this one over here is a Dodge. Now, as I was stating earlier, this is that other clutch, and now this is the one that fits on the Ford, and you can see that the splines are different on the shaft and the clutch. This one here is the Dodge. Again, you can see the splines. There's 23 spline on this, and that's the shaft right there. As we look at this, we also see that our sleeve is broken here. That's right here. That will be the throat bearing sleeve, retainer, whatever you want to call it, and that's the bearing that slides on there. So we need a new one of these as well. But the other thing to take note of here is our bolt pattern. So this is the Dodge bolt pattern here. So these 4 bolts. After determining your bolt pattern, now we have to find the bell housing that matches. Now we come here, this is the original equipment for that late model Dodge Fargo truck style. This here is likely off of something similar to a 1964 Fargo or Dodge truck. Big, heavy cast iron steel bell housing right here. This one right here, I think I got this one off of a small block Dodge truck. It could be 70s or 80s. But what I want you to notice is that in both cases, this bolts to the NP435. That's our bolt pattern there. That's our bolt pattern there. That's what's important here. Moving on to this one here, this does not have the NP435 bolt pattern. I do believe this is the one that's going to bolt up to like an A838 or an A833 transmission with the side loader we looked at earlier. Again, this is that style that we're looking at. This is that 1970s, 1980s manual transmission in a half-ton truck style. And also notice we've got the starter mount location up high, and you'll see we have that starter mount location right there. Right here is the one that I found that we can use for our project. I think it comes out of possibly a van or a truck, late 70s, early 80s, maybe mid 80s, I'm not sure. But that's the casting number that's on it. And we have our bolt pattern that will fit onto our NP435 like we want. And we have our high mount starter right there, which is ideal for the Slant 6 people. Some people like that high mount starter where you can get at it a little easier. If we take a look at the bell housings flipped up here, we can see the open face on here. Now, if you take a look, between all of these bell housings, you'll notice that those three over there have a full open face on them. And this one here does not. Now this one is the original equipment that goes with an older style Slant 6. To my knowledge, it'd be around a 1964 to 1967. It could go beyond that, but those are the ones that I've personally worked with and ran into this. They designed it in a way that you would bolt your flywheel and your clutch and your pressure plate assembly onto the back of the engine, and then slide this over top, and then bolt the bell housing to the block. And then lastly, you would take the transmission and you would install it into the bell housing and then bolt it to the bell housing. You'll see that hole, that's for the low mount starter, and it's an old style starter, so that's what they're calling the 3-bolt starter, and it's an old one that fits in there. And so that's another thing that we got to think about is our pitch for our teeth and our outside diameter and the engagement on the starter to the flywheel. My intent is to use this one because this is the one that's going to bolt to the Slant 6. It's also going to bolt to the NP435. And then we have to make sure that our starter is going to line up with our flywheel when it's all said and done. We've put on the flywheel and the bell housing, and what we want to do is we want to fit our starter and see how that fits in there. One thing to note is it's all factory parts, but they were never intended to be put together in this fashion. The bell housing is from a mid-1980s vehicle. The engine we've identified as 1965. The flywheel assembly would not match this bell housing, and so we want to put it all together and see how it fits. This end of the starter here has to fit into the slot there, and you can see that our ring gear is in the way, so that is not going to happen. So this ring gear diameter needs to be back further this way. I've ordered a new ring gear and we're going to see when it arrives, but in all honesty, it is a direct replacement for this flywheel, and I assume that we'd have the same situation all over again.